Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. My name is Chrissy Epp. I'm the Strategic Advisor for the Office of the CEO, and today's conversation is going to dive into a project that's really close to my heart, Audible Stories. The impact that this initiative has had is astonishing and heartwarming. So today we're going to go behind the scenes to share the collaboration both internally and externally, reaching across publishers, educators, community organizations, and government officials to see how we made this happen. I'm happy to have some of my colleagues with me. These are people who have had huge impacts on how the program developed over time. And as we chat today, I invite anyone who used Audible Stories to share your experience in the comments section. So let me introduce our panelists. Today from our Berlin hub is Eloise Elandalusi, Director of Content. Hello.
Hi, Chrissy.
Hi. From Singapore, we've got Avni Singh, Director of Brand and Communication.
Hey, Chrissy.
Hey, Avni. And then the last two are joining from my neck of the woods, geographically closer to me around our Newark hub. Doug Haber, Director of Software Development.
Hey, Chrissy.
Hello. And Brian Andrews, International Public Policy Director.
Hey, everybody.
Hi, I'm so glad to see you all. We worked so intensely to get stories off the ground, and wow, it was just a great time, and I'm glad that we're reunited to do this session today. So let me set the stage. Back in March 2020, when the pandemic first started shutting things down worldwide, our CEO, Bob Kerrigan, got this tweet, and I'm going to read it to make sure I get it right. I'm a school librarian in Dubai, and we're preparing for distance learning due to school closure for COVID-19. This study shows the impact that reading aloud can have on children. Can we talk about how Audible might be able to help? And Bob thought this was such a good idea that he quickly pulled together some key leaders to see what was feasible. And the very next day, he told me, just go do it, just make it happen. So we quickly pulled together a core team, and it grew over time. In just 10 days, we made Stories a reality. Many of us had never worked with each other before, but we were all empowered to do what we needed to do to move fast and make it real. All right, so that's a lot of me talking. Now I want to turn to Eloise. And can you tell everyone more about what Audible Stories actually is?
Sure. Audible Stories was a collection of free titles for kids of all ages in 9 languages that could be streamed for free globally with absolutely no subscription or login needed. And as you said, Chrissy, when this started in March 2020, we had no idea this was going to be a global pandemic or how this would impact us all. The only thing we knew is that there was an immediate need and we were able to help. So we launched Stories with 400 titles in 6 languages, and we thought they would be available for only a couple of months. But what is great about Stories is that it kept growing and evolving over time. And that's how we expanded to 9 languages towards the end, making eventually content available in English, Spanish, both in Latin Spanish and Castilian, French, German, Italian, Dutch, Portuguese, Hindi, and Japanese. I hope I'm not forgetting any. And also we kept extending over time, like I think 3 or 4 times until June 2021 as the situation evolved. And during all those months, I think millions of listeners from more than 180 countries and territories streamed our titles to keep the kids engaged, learning, and entertained at home. So that's obviously incredible. And why did we do all this? Because caring for our local communities and being, taking action to make an impact is really what is central to our mission as a company. And that's why we were all motivated by making that difference and move fast to make it real.
Thank you for that. And yeah, we had so many great contributions from our content team. Obviously, we needed great content to make this impactful for the people who were coming to visit Audible Stories. You really emerged, though, as a leader to help us amass content and keep all of our international teams informed of our progress. So how were you able to work with publishers and internal teams so effectively to coordinate this launch and get so much content in so many languages so quickly?
I was personally just a coordinator in all this on the international side of things, but I'm very happy you asked, Chrissy, because I think Stories was such a unique global collaborative effort, both internally and externally. So internally, in less than 72 hours, all our content teams worldwide had compiled a bespoke catalog of content that was compelling enough, that was diverse enough to please all ages and tastes, and very importantly, that was available immediately. What we saw and was incredible is that publishers in most of our territories reacted immediately. They were very engaged and eager to participate, and they understood the purpose. And even after launch, we had creatives and publishers from new countries reaching out to us to add content to stories, or even to refresh the selections they had already available. So that's how we enriched the catalog, and that's also how we expanded from 6 to 9 languages in the end, at the end. And another example of how we work together fast to make it real is that Harry Potter book one, the complete book, was available for free streaming worldwide in all its existing audio language versions for several months. And that's quite an achievement.
It was amazing. I remember that. I couldn't believe it when the team at Pottermore, they had heard what we were doing, and they thought that Stories was a great way to complement their Harry Potter at Home initiative. So we had about a week to get prepped and add Harry Potter Book 1 to the site in all of these languages. And for those of you who are super fans out there, this was a Stephen Fry version, which had never before been available to North American audiences. So it was a really big deal. Thank you, Eloise, for that. And I want to turn to Doug a little bit on this thread of like not knowing what to expect, not knowing what's going to happen when we put Harry Potter on the site. You and your teams quickly came up with a plan to develop the site and to scale it, both when we were launching initially and then as the site evolved over time. We didn't really have a comparable free offering, so we really weren't sure what our targets were, but we also knew that we wanted to make the site really safe for any kids who are coming to use it. So how did you and the team do this in 10 days?
Yeah, it was challenging because there were a few major technical hurdles that we had to clear in order to enable anonymous users to stream a specific set of content to as many platforms as possible with as few barriers to entry as possible. The first hurdle was, how do we allow anonymous access to a specific set of content? Traditionally, Audible uses geolocation or your membership plan in order to figure out what you should have access to. But in this case, you're not logged in, so we don't have a user ID. We don't really know very much about you. Luckily, the team had recently been working on an application in the India marketplace called Suno, which allows users to access a specific set of content for the India marketplace, and they never have to log in. So this was very similar to what we wanted to do for Stories. The content was managed by the content team, and so they could add or remove titles however they wanted, and that didn't affect our code at all. We didn't have to do any deployments or any changes, and that was super helpful. The second hurdle was, how do we have an application that could run on a ton of different platforms and have very limited barriers to entry? Fortunately, the team had also been recently working on a React-based app that was a web application. So that meant it could run on desktop or mobile, Android, iOS, whatever. It didn't require any downloading. You didn't have to install anything. So the team was able to take this application as a base, strip away anything that wasn't necessary for Stories. So no login page, no settings pages, no library, none of that kind of stuff. And then make sure that we were able to give access in the same way that we did with the Suno application, and then any user experience changes that had previously been designed by the marketing team. Since Audible is an Amazon company, we have access to all of the Amazon tools and all of that Amazon infrastructure. We do all of our building and testing and deploying using Amazon pipelines. We host all of our services in Amazon data centers. And so we expect to have worldwide scale. And any services that we build, the expectation is that when it gets designed and when it gets written, it needs to meet that level of demand. So by tying together these existing applications and services, we were able to create a working app that was able to scale up to millions of users all around the world, and was ready to use in about 10 days.
Thanks for that. And Yeah, of course, it's great that we had all of those pieces to pull together, but let's not underestimate the work it took to identify those pieces and realize that they would work for this, and all the great work that the teams did to pull them together into this really great offering. And when I think back, we weren't sure what the impact of stories would be. We just knew that we were putting something good out into the world. And we got something back really quickly. We started hearing from customers everywhere about how they were using stories and how it was helping them. I can remember entire school districts and school systems reaching out and telling parents while their schools were closed, this was a great thing for them to do. One thing that really resonated with me, since I was suddenly a mom at home with 2 young kids working full time, not the kids, I was, she said that she had created a new routine with her kids, and they listened to stories every day, every night at bedtime to fall asleep. And it was kind of like a bright new thing in this crazy time of the pandemic when routines were disrupted. What was really remarkable is that we had a general sense of where our stories listeners were in the world. We saw that from feedback, but we also saw that in some of our aggregated data. And within the very first week, we saw that we had listeners from over 180 countries and territories, as Eloise mentioned earlier. I actually had to look that up to make sure that there were 180 countries and territories in the world. Because like, are these data accurate? And they were. It was amazing. So we knew that we were providing this service that had a very low bar of entry. It was only you needed a device and an internet connection. But still, in many parts of the world, that was a barrier. So Brian, now I want to turn to you and ask you to tell us a little bit about the reaction to stories globally, and also the very special work that we did to help in places that weren't so connected.
Great. No, thank you, Chrissy. And thank you for your leadership on this initiative and how inclusive you were bringing so many of us in, because this was a very special thing to work on, and I know it all meant a lot to us. In the public policy shop here, we recognized right away that responding to COVID was the top priority for governments at every level, local, state, international. And we recognized Audible Stories could be a resource for them. It could be part of the offerings that they're providing to support their people at this difficult time. So we reached out to officials and governments around the world just to make them aware of this program. And we got incredible reaction. A number of elected officials tweeted it, sent it to their constituents. A number of governments listed it as an available resource to them, including the United Kingdom, Japan, and Brazil. And as people were noticing it, we got a letter from Peru's Minister of Education, Martin Benavides. And it's important to remember Peru was early on one of the hardest hit countries by COVID. They had a very high number of cases, despite a relatively small population size. They had a massive economic contraction. And then this in turn compounded a huge internal migration crisis. So in Peru, people were just fleeing the cities for the countryside. And the Minister of Education commended us for this program, said how important it was, but noted that Peru has a lot of internet access limitations. And he said that there were about 1 million children in Peru that lacked access to the internet or even TV and relied on the radio to get their information. In response to this, he launched an innovative program where the government was providing educational program on Peru's national public radio since the schools were closed. And he asked us if Audible Stories could be incorporated into these lesson plans to help educate these kids. And this was obviously very new to us. We had never been on the radio before. We had never kind of pursued an agreement like this. So there was a lot to figure out. But a group of us recognized how important this was. I mean, this is the mission, like to help some of the most vulnerable and the most impacted by COVID. So we knew we wanted to find a way to make this happen. So we immediately reached out to our content team. We identified 33 Spanish language titles that we had all the necessary rights for to be able to actually broadcast this on radio. We started talks with the government to reach kind of an agreement, as well as to figure out the technical specifications. And as I said, radio is new to us. So our team did a lot to get the audio kind of quality and format right. And a lot went on behind the scenes with many people to get us there. And in the end, we were able to get the titles down to Peru, and educators embedded it into their programming, and we started broadcasting last year. And this was really important to me, as well as a number of other people, because this was the start of the pandemic, and as we were working through the summer, and it was easy to feel very discouraged and helpless, and like there was nothing we could do. And this was a case where we were really helping, and it felt good, for us individuals, but also we were very happy to work for a company like Audible that, not only allowed us to do this, but like supported us and encouraged us to find ways to be helpful during the pandemic.
Thanks, Brian. This one was really heartwarming to me, and I still get a little teary sometimes when we talk about it. And you mentioned that this project was inclusive. I don't take any credit for that, because at Audible, we really believe in activate caring. And this is such a great example. I didn't have to go out and seek other people's involvement. People came to the Stories project from all corners and cross-functionally across Audible with ideas of how we could expand the impact of stories. And Avni, this is when I'm really thinking of you, because you very recently did this and you worked to help expand Stories' impact during a real time of need. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you and others evolved Stories during the height of the COVID-19 crisis in India?
Sure. Thanks, Chrissy. I remember very distinctly that around the second lockdown, the second wave in India, in fact, when most of the cities were starting to get into lockdown, we started noticing this resurgence in conversations, social media mentions, WhatsApp forwards for stories. That's when we kind of realized that this is gaining a lot more momentum, or it's found a second life in the second wave. So we realized that this is an opportunity for us to try and provide some sort of relief to families who are locked in, especially with little kids. We also sort of looked back at, the first wave when we had started programming for COVID. We realized that we created a bunch of content. We also saw recent trends, and we realized that there's a huge need for Hindi content. There was a huge need for content in the mythology space, not just on Audible, but pretty much across every media format. And we also realized that there's a need for meditation. So all of this seems pretty intuitive, but we did pick up on these cues. And so we knew what we wanted to provide, what people were looking for, and we knew that they wanted it right now. So we quickly sprung into action. We worked with teams, including yours, and thank you so much for being super supportive with that. We basically worked with publishers and Audible teams across the globe to kind of add hundreds and hundreds of more stories. We created a 9th tab, which was for Hindi, which I think was our 9th language. And we also created a custom tab for English stories from India. And as Doug mentioned, I think the way Stories was constructed, it was really easy for us to kind of take everything live. So yeah, I'm super thankful. And I guess it's a function of Audible and, like you said, activate caring, that people actually worked around the clock. There were time differences which didn't stand in our way. And over the next couple of days, we were able to add a lot more content. So during this period, I think I want to say from April to the time that we till the time that we had Stories live, I think India saw an incredible level of consumption, far surpassing all other countries and much, much more than we saw in the first wave. So yeah, I think at the end, we were all very happy that maybe our efforts kind of paid off and we were able to help in a small way.
Oh, it's not a small way. I think it was really meaningful. It was obviously impactful. You're right about the data that we did have, that, yeah, it made a huge impact in India and we had lots of listeners. And I'm so grateful to your team that you were able to imagine and invent ways that we could differentiate the experience for people in India during that time. It's such a great example of how we didn't just, in those 10 days, create Stories, launch it, and just kind of forget it. We kept working to see how we could make it more meaningful and how we could react to the world around us as situations changed. We did close the Stories site at the end of June, but to close out this LinkedIn Live, I want to ask each of you to think back about your time on Stories and tell me about some experience that stayed with you. I'm going to go last. Avni, I'm going to ask you first.
Sure. So it's kind of had a personal impact. It's sort of been one of the highlights, maybe the biggest highlight for me this year. So just to tell you like a really quick personal anecdote, everybody from India who's probably watching it now is part of at least 3 or 4 family groups. We have these, WhatsApp is really huge, and we're constantly getting forwards on these family groups and friend groups. And in fact, that's one of the places that we actually noticed a lot of the Stories mentions coming up. And I remember that right about the time that we took Hindi and the English Tab Live with many hundreds of stories of from India, I started getting a bunch of forwards talking about how great Stories is. And I know a couple of people who know I work for Audible actually asked me if I had something to do with it. And I can tell you, it felt really, really great to say, yes, I probably have a small contribution to make. And it kind of reinforced, why we do what we do and why Audible is such a great place to work in.
Thank you for sharing that. All right, let's see who's next. Eloise.
Yes, I think as was said here, there were many meaningful parts of working on Stories. But for me, I think the most gratifying moment happened very recently. So a colleague from our UK content team forwarded me an email from a customer, and a mother was telling us that her daughter, who had been diagnosed with severe dyslexia and predicted for illiteracy, had just passed her common entrance exam with an A in English, thanks to spending months of lockdown listening to every single storybook available on Stories over and over again. And apparently Stories had fueled her love for books so much that she started writing her own. So even if this younger has all the credits for such an amazing accomplishment, I'm very grateful that Stories was a little bit part of it.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that story until now. Thank you for sharing it. Okay, Brian, you're up next.
I mean, there's a ton, but one that comes to mind now is similar to what Avni was talking about, kind of a second life for Audible Stories. Earlier this year, a colleague of mine reached out to me and said that Mexico social media was blowing up on Audible, specifically on these educator channels, because the schools were still closed, and there was just a lot of chatter about Audible. And my colleague was like, "Did we launch something new? Like, what's going on?" And so we dug into it, and it was Audible Stories. It's something that we had launched 9 months before, but it was getting a new life, and it was being shared by educators across the country as a resource to them. And so it's just great to see. I mean, that it's just got such a life of its own, and it's being shared by people who are using it in a way that's benefiting a lot of people.
Thank you for that. Doug, what's your memory?
So I think there's lots of cool tech stories. It's really amazing how the team came together and was able to like creatively think about what can we do and what can we do quickly in order to enable all of this functionality really quickly. But on a personal note, I remember when COVID first started and my kids were home all the time, and we were just trying to figure out like, what are we going to do? Like, how do we keep them entertained? And I was like, oh, hey, I'm working on this project. Maybe they would be interested in that. And they're like, oh, Dad's working on it. That doesn't sound like fun at all. I was like, no, try. Like, it's books. You can listen to Harry Potter or whatever. It'll be cool. And so they were like, reluctantly, okay, fine. And I just have this image of my youngest son. He got so into it that I remember him falling asleep on his bed, and he still had his headphones on, and he's like laying half on the bed, and Audible is still playing, and it just like it was so awesome. So it's cool to be a part of that and to see it affect millions of people, but also, you know, in my house, it had an effect as well, which I think was really awesome.
Yeah, I can relate to that. My then 2-year-old listened to one of our titles on repeat, which I was grateful for. But then after maybe like the 100th time, I was like, let's look at some of this other great content.
Yeah.
Well, for me, not to be cheesy, but you know, sometimes I am. For me, it was really seeing how this team came together. And none of us here on screen had worked together before. And suddenly we worked together so intensely. And I developed a profound respect for what all of you do and also just who you are as people. And we became friends. So it was a really meaningful experience for me. And woo, I want to thank you, Eloise, Doug, Brian, and Avni, for all of your contributions to Audible Stories. Wow, it's been a memorable experience. And I also want to thank everyone else who's not on screen today. There are so many people who dedicated a huge portion of their lives to get stories out and to make it as impactful as it was. So thank you to them. And then thank you to the many millions of you who listened to Audible Stories and who invited us into your homes and classrooms over the past 15 months. So with that, I'm going to say have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you, everyone.